ever feel like reaching everyone on the planet is just impossible? Well, today's deep dive looks into this really powerful movement, mostly unseen, that's actually making some surprising progress connecting with literally every people group.
That's right. We're drawing on David Taylor's work, The Progress of the Frontier Mission Movement, looking back over about 30 years, from Edinburgh 1980 to Tokyo 2010.
Okay, so Taylor's piece gives us a history lesson on this frontier mission movement.
Exactly. It's this modern push, really gathered steam, back in the early 70s, mostly within evangelical circles at first.
Right.
Researchers were onto it earlier. But that 1980 Edinburgh conference, that was kind of the launch pad for broader action.
Okay, so not just theory. So what's our mission here today, digging into this? What are we hoping you, the listener, will get out of it?
Well, the aim is to really understand how it all started, what the big milestones have been over, say, the last 40 years or so, and where things seem to be heading. We want to give you a clearer picture of this whole global effort and honestly point out some developments that are pretty unexpected.
Okay, let's do it. Back to the beginning then. Early 70s leading up to Edinburgh 80. How did this actually get off the ground?
Well, it's interesting. The very first sort of crucial step was just figuring out who these unreached peoples actually were.
You mean like making a list?
Pretty much, yeah. It built on work already being done by groups like Wycliffe Bible translators. They were identifying the Bible-less peoples, groups without the Bible in their own language.
Ah, okay.
So the next logical step was, okay, we groups don't just lack the Bible, but lack any kind of established Christian community within their own culture.
Got it. So it's about having a local church, not just a translated book. And this is where that researcher, David Barrett, comes in, mapping it all out.
Exactly. Barrett had done all this work on church growth in Africa, presented it back in '72, and that became a sort of model.
A template for going global.
Right. He then put together this huge global list, something like 13,000 ethno-linguistic peoples. And that list, well, it became foundational for a lot of the mission databases later on.
Yeah.
You can't really tackle a problem until you know how big it is.
Makes sense. You need the data first. Then, 1974, Lausanne. How did that fit in?
Lausanne was really significant for just raising awareness globally. That's where Ralph Winter and his team from Fuller School World Mission came up with the first real estimates of unreached peoples.
Ah, putting numbers to it.
Yes, and they also did the first big global survey. Sent out, I think it was over 2,000 questionnaires to mission groups worldwide. It showed people were starting to recognize the issue and wanted to grasp it better.
Okay, fast forward 6 years. Edinburgh 1980, you said it was pivotal. What really changed there?
Edinburgh 80 was the catalyst, really. They had this watchword, a church for every people by the year 2000. That really caught on, gave people a concrete goal.
A rallying cry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it led straight into launching the Adopt a People campaign.
Yeah.
That was like the first time different mission agencies really teamed up to focus on specific groups together.
So collaborations started happening.
Big time. And the 82,000 movement also spun out of that conference. The first global network really focused just on these frontier missions.
Okay.
But maybe the biggest shift, it was who got involved. Edinburgh basically moved the whole thing from being mainly the concern of missiologists and researchers.
Academics?
Yeah, to the actual missionary sending agencies, the organizations that had the people, the resources, the infrastructure to actually do something.
Right, the boots on the ground, so to speak.
Okay, so the data's there. Awareness is up. The organizations are engaged. What happened next? What kind of progress have we actually seen in the, 40 years since then?
This is where it gets genuinely surprising. The progress has been, pretty remarkable.
How so? The source we're looking at, Taylor's paper, it states that in just these last few decades, more individuals from Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu backgrounds have become followers of Christ than in all the previous centuries combined.
Wait, say that again? More than in all the centuries before.
That's what the research indicates. It's a staggering statistic, really. It completely flips the script on what many people assume.
Wow. That definitely reframes things. And it's not just individuals, right? You mentioned movements.
Exactly. We're not just talking scattered conversions. We've seen the start of actual church planting movements among some really large, unreached mega peoples. Groups with over 1 million people.
In places where there was basically nothing before.
Virtually nothing, yes. Places where just a few decades ago a Christian presence was almost non-existent.
Can you give us some examples? Where are these breakthroughs happening?
Sure. Okay, so within the Muslim world, look at South Asia. Among the Bengali people, for instance, there are now estimated to be at least 500,000 believers from a Muslim background.
500,000.
Yes. And often, this is involved using what they call contextualized approaches, adapting methods to fit the local culture, which seems key.
Makes sense. What else in the Muslim world?
Iran is another incredible example.
Hmm.
Despite, obviously, huge challenges, there's a really strong underground church movement, thousands of house fellowships that are multiplying.
Underground. Wow.
And Christian satellite TV in Farsi has had a massive impact there. Since around 2000, estimates suggest over half the population has watched it at some point.
That's incredible reach through media. What about the Arab world more broadly?
Well, there's SAT-7. That's a Christian satellite TV network broadcasting across the region. They have a regular audience of something like 8.5 million people.
1.5 million regular viewers.
Yeah. And then North Africa, there's been a huge response among the Berber peoples. One movement among the Kabyle group is estimated to be several 100,000 strong now.
Okay, so real momentum there. What about Buddhist and Hindu contexts? Different challenges, I imagine.
Definitely different contexts. In the Buddhist world, Cambodia stands out. Church growth there has been just exponential. From a tiny handful of believers maybe 20, 25 years ago to an estimated 400,000 today.
400,000 in Cambodia.
Yeah. And Mongolia shows a similar pattern. Went from just a few scattered believers to over 70,000 people in about 200 established fellowships in roughly the same time frame.
That kind of growth is just hard to wrap your head around. What about the Hindu world? That seems like a complex picture.
It is complex. One really interesting development is the emergence of what are known as Krista-bhaktas. These are essentially devotees of Jesus, but they often keep many aspects of their Hindu cultural identity. It looks different from, say, Western Christianity.
So faith expressed within their own cultural framework.
Exactly. And this movement is estimated to involve at least 10 million people.
10 million?
At least. Plus, you have these rapidly growing house church movements spreading across India, and they're interesting because they often cut across both Hindu and Muslim communities. It suggests maybe those traditional barriers, like the caste system, aren't quite the insurmountable walls people sometimes assume.
These are really significant shifts, and the source also mentions something about the number of people involved, the missionaries themselves.
Yes, that's another huge piece of the puzzle. In just the last decade or so, the number of missionaries focused specifically on these unreached peoples has basically doubled.
Doubled in 10 years.
Effectively, yes. And think about this ratio. Back in 1980, the estimate was roughly one missionary for every million Muslims globally.
1 per million.
Today, it's closer to one missionary for every 100,000 Muslims.
Wow, that's a tenfold increase in focus, relatively speaking. That's massive. Where are all these new missionaries coming from? Is it still mostly the West?
That's the fascinating part. No, it's not.
Yeah.
The majority of these new workers are actually not from traditional Western sending countries.
Really? So where from?
Many are from nations in the global South Africa, Asia, Latin America. Often they come from cultures or people groups that are geographically or culturally much closer to the unreached groups they're going to.
Ah, so the cultural distance is shrinking.
Precisely. There's less of a gap to bridge in terms of language, worldview, customs. Yeah. And that seems to be a major factor in why we're seeing this accelerating momentum.
Less cultural baggage, maybe? More organic connections.
Something like that, yeah. And all this adds up to a possibility that feels, well, quite real now. The potential to actually see every people group have access to the gospel message within this generation.
That's a pretty bold statement, but based on these trends, it sounds like more than just wishful thinking.
The data suggests it's a tangible possibility, yes.
Okay, so if that's the potential, looking forward, say, the next decade or so, what are the big strategies? What are people focusing on now to keep this momentum going?
Well, building on that AD 2000 movement, we're seeing several big global initiatives now zeroing in on the unengaged.
Unengaged, meaning?
Meaning those unreached people groups, where, as far as anyone knows, there's currently no long-term intentional church planting effort happening at all. No one's there specifically trying to establish a local fellowship.
Okay, the absolute frontiers. Tell us about these initiatives.
Okay, one major player is Finishing the Task, or FTT. It launched back in 2003. Their first goal was tackling all the unengaged groups with populations over 100,000.
Right.
And they made incredible progress. The number of groups on that list dropped from 639 down to just 95 by 2010.
Wow, that's focus.
Definitely. So now they're expanding their scope to target unengaged groups of 50,000 people or more. It's a very clear, targeted approach to reach those with zero access currently.
Very specific, measurable goals. Okay, what else?
Another key network is Vision 5.9.
Yeah.
Now, their primary focus is on coordinating agencies working specifically among Muslim peoples.
Ah, focused on one religious bloc.
Right. And their big goal is to see every single Muslim people group engaged, meaning having at least one missionary team working there by the year 2025.
That's soon.
It is ambitious. They act as more of a global hub, a forum for sharing strategies, best practices, what's working, what's not, specifically in Muslim contexts. It's maybe less about adopting groups like FTT and more about facilitating better collaboration among those already in or going into that field.
Okay, so coordination within that specific sphere. What's the third big one?
That would be the Global Network of Mission Structures, or GNMS. This was founded by Ralph D. Winter, who we mentioned earlier. The idea here is bigger picture, building an alliance, maybe 2,000 mission agencies working together on a global strategy for church planting and making disciples.
Ambitious.
Very. Their focus includes the underengaged. These are often very large people groups where there are some missionaries, but just not nearly enough to really make significant headway.
So not zero engagement, but not enough for critical mass.
Exactly. They're setting up task forces, regional, national, even focused on clusters of related peoples to figure out where the biggest gaps are and really encourage deploying more church planting coordinators strategically.
It really sounds like a shift towards much more intentional, large-scale planning and coordination.
That's definitely the trend. And remember what we said about where missionaries are coming from.
Yeah, increasingly non-Western.
Well, that's a huge factor in these future plans. The Korean Church, for example, has made a national commitment to send 100,000 missionaries over the next 20 years, specifically with a frontier mission focus.
100,000 from Korea alone.
That's the goal. And you hear similar massive goals coming from churches in places like the Philippines, China. A lot of this energy is directed towards these unreached frontiers.
So listening to all this, it feels like the main bottleneck going forward isn't necessarily a lack of people wanting to go or even a lack of resources.
Increasingly, no.
But it's about connecting the dots, making sure the right people and resources get to the right places efficiently.
That really nails it. The source suggests the core challenge is becoming more and more about coordination. How do you effectively link up this growing global workforce? How do you align strategies between hundreds, even thousands of different groups?
That's a massive logistical and relational challenge.
Huge. But there's also a growing awareness of this very challenge, which is fueling these collaborative networks like FTT, Vision 5.9, and GNMS. The potential for truly significant cooperative efforts seems higher than ever.
It really paints a picture of a potentially transformative era in, well, global religious history, I suppose.
It really does. And Taylor's paper concludes on that note. It suggests that if, major global upheavals don't derail things.
A big if these days, maybe.
True, a necessary caveat. But if conditions remain relatively stable, that vision you see in the Bible in Revelation 5.9, this image of a great crowd from every nation, tribe, people, and language worshiping together, that vision could actually potentially be fulfilled in our lifetime, which would be, an absolutely epical moment, a fulfillment of something promised way back with Abraham in Genesis.
Wow. So, okay, wrapping this deep dive up. We've journeyed from just trying to identify these unreached groups back in the 70s.
Right, the initial mapping and research.
Through decades of really surprising progress in reaching incredibly diverse communities, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus.
See, movements start where there was nothing.
To now, this intense focus on coordination, on tackling the remaining unengaged, and harnessing this huge wave of non-Western mission sending.
It's quite a trajectory.
It really is a remarkable story of a global movement that's had a far bigger impact than I think most people realize.
Absolutely. And as the source material really emphasizes, what might have seemed like a far-off dream a generation ago reaching every people group now feels like a distinct possibility. It hinges, of course, on continued effort, resources, and, maybe most critically, this increasing drive for collaboration.
It definitely leaves you with something big to think about, the potential to witness, maybe even participate in, a moment of profound historical and spiritual significance, connecting back to promises made thousands of years ago.